okay with cutting that back to 50 here. I like the layout. I think it's a major improvement for the building that's sitting there now. I think with a little more engineering, we probably maybe get some of that paving off the drainage easement. If that is a true area that drainage is coming down that fence line. But just general, for just a quick layout for looking how he's utilizing the land, I don't have an issue with it. That's just my thoughts.
We're coming on 6:30, so we're going to adjourn this work session, and we will discuss this a little bit more after our regular meeting. It is on our agenda item for the regular meeting, so we'll pick it back up. All right.
Just a quick note. The Beef O'Brady's calculations, Mayor, Mr. Chairman, 1.2, based on the number of seats, everything lines up with calculations as approved, site plan, and then the space that they're talking about is the 10. So the restaurant, based on the number of seats in the chart, requires 35 spaces. There are 10 left over that Casey says meets that requirement. Again, I'll remind all of you, those are minimum parking requirements, which means that anybody that comes in here with a development should look at what their proposed use is. And we'll talk about that further. I think that's something that we ought to talk about publicly. So.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Roll call, Carol.
Gant. Davis.
Here.
Diamond.
Here.
Vaughn. Lindsay. Smith. Nelson.
Here.
Leday. McMillan.
Here.
Thank you, Carol. I'd like to ask everybody, please stand for the invocation and pledge allegiance. Dave, do you mind leading us here this evening, sir?
Father, we thank you for everything you give us, and we thank you for this opportunity to be here tonight. And we ask that you bless this meeting, bless these people that give of their time and serve this community and the families that allow them to do that. We ask that you give them wisdom to make decisions that would be right for this community. And Father, we ask that you continue to show your love and blessings upon us as you have. And Father, we ask that you protect those people who protect our freedoms. And Father, at this point in time, there are so many complicated issues going on, state, local, national, international. And Father, we just ask that you keep your hand in that and guide us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, David. All right, Mayor, do we have any city council report?
Afraid I don't at this meeting. Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll move on then. All right, we have minutes to approve, March 27th work session, April 10th work session, April 10th regular session. Do we have any errors or changes anybody wants to note? None? All right, minutes stand approved as written. We have old business, agenda item 230402, application for site plan. The description is Premier Family Care Clinic Parking Addition at 32128 Broken Branch Circle. The applicant is Tensaw Engineering on behalf of Chad Lambeth. Casey, your staff report, please, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this site plan application proposes to add additional parking to the site on the existing lot as well as the lot directly to the south. The current site plan proposes an additional 0.26 acres of asphalt for parking. Proposed use is to utilize the site as a medical office. The existing conditions within the vicinity of the subject property are typically medium to high traffic commercial uses similar to what is being proposed at the site. Because the applicant is proposing a use in conformance with its current / proposed zoning classification, and because the use conforms largely to its surrounding uses, impact is expected to be minimal. The subject property was not identified on the comprehensive plan's future land use map, as it was located outside of the corporate limits at the time the map was created. Property owner has submitted a request to rezone Lot 2 from R1 to B2, and Lot 3 has previously been rezoned to B2. The proposed use does conform to the current and proposed zoning district of B2 local business. Staff has Staff is satisfied that all requirements pertaining to drainage on the proposed site has been accounted for. A landscape plan in accordance with the most recent version of the landscape ordinance has been provided. Applicant intends to plant a total of 25 overstory/understory trees in order to meet the minimum tree protection/planting requirements. The proposed parking area will far exceed the minimum required parking for medical and dental offices. Because the proposed use should not require large volumes of ingress/egress at one time, and the site is accessed internal to the existing shopping center, impact on traffic is expected to be minimal. The staff does not feel that a traffic impact analysis is needed for the current development. Staff has reviewed all submitted information regarding this application and has found all required documentation to be accounted for and in compliance with all applicable ordinances and regulations. Therefore, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve agenda item 230402, application for site plan approval for Premier Family Care Clinic parking.
All right, thank you, Casey. We'll open it up for discussion. Any discussion? All right, discussion's closed. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve agenda item 230402, application for site plan.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All right, roll call. Carol, please.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond,
Yes.
Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lede,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
All right, motion's approved. All right, we'll move along to new business now. We have agenda item 230501. This is an application for land use. It's Boutique Butcher Shop located at 8495 Spanish Fort Boulevard, Suite B. The applicant is Jamie and Nicole Hilbun. Casey, staff report, please, sir.
There we go. Mr. Chairman, this applicant is proposing to utilize one of the two available commercial spaces located in the recently built commercial space next to Beef O'Brady's restaurant to open a retail meat shop. The applicants have stated that the store will be handling the cutting of subprimal cuts of meat as well as custom cuts according to customer requests, and will also include the sale of pantry and home good items as well as pre-cooked items for to-go lunches or take-home meals. The overall site was recently approved as a site plan by the Planning Commission and has since finished construction. Based on the submitted information, the proposed use is either analogous or included with 3 possible uses in the table of permitted uses. The allowed uses similar to this proposed use are currently grocery store retail, bakery retail, and seafood store retail, all of which require Planning Commission approval in B2 local business zoning. The overall site was recently approved by the Planning Commission via site plan approval and was found to meet all requirements at the time of approval. According to the parking calculations as laid out in section 7.62 of the Spanish Fort zoning ordinance, the current layout of the available space to be utilized at 2,000 square feet would require food stores, furniture stores, general service establishments catering to the retail trade to have no less than 8 parking spaces for this use. The site plan as approved calculated the parking for this unit at 1 space for every 200 square feet, which provided a total of 10 spaces for the 2 units, so 5 spaces for this unit in particular, therefore exceeding the minimum required parking for the proposed use. Staff has reviewed the submitted information regarding this application and has found the proposed use to be, depending on how the Planning Commission determines whether it would fall under a grocery store or whether it would be analogous to an existing use, has found the proposed use to be clearly analogous with similar uses as mentioned prior and listed in the table of permitted uses in the Spanish Fort zoning ordinance, and that those similar uses would be allowed at this site with Planning Commission approval in the current zoning district. Pending further comments and or requirements by the Planning Commission for this use, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve agenda item 230501, application for land use for butcher shop retail or grocery store retail in B2 at 8495 Spanish Fork Boulevard, Suite B. And if the planning commission determines it needs to be a separate use, to send a positive recommendation to the city council to amend the table of permitted uses accordingly.
All right, thank you, Casey. We'll open it up for discussion.
I guess I'm still a bit confused. In your opening statement on the general discussion, it says 2 available commercial spaces. Isn't there only one 2,000 square foot?
Only one,
This,
2,000.
Okay, that's where I got,
That's right.
okay.
there's two. No, there's 2 units. Each one is 1,000 square feet. So the 2,000 square feet was the total of the 2.
But they're
Okay, that- yeah, we've-
utilizing one?
Yes.
They're only using 1,000 feet of it?
Yes.
I was a little confused too. I thought it was 2,000, but it's 2,000 total, so that's 2 units of 1,000. Okay. All right, any other discussion?
What's the zone?
All right, discussion's closed. Do we have a motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to take it in, this is a land use application, right? We need to take it in 2 steps, I think. One is to determine which classification it should go in. So if you are of the opinion that a butcher shop should be considered a grocery store retail category, if that's the most clearly analogous use, then I think you would make a motion to make that finding for purposes of the table of permitted uses. If you do that, then we will forward that to the city council. They'll come back with a zoning amendment to add that to the table, and the butcher shop will be treated as a grocery store from that point going forward. And then once you make that determination, then you'll take a second vote on whether or not you want to approve this use on this site, because grocery stores in B2 are allowed with planning commission approval. So your first motion or step ought to be to whether or not you want to make a finding that a butcher shop is most clearly analogous use is a grocery store retail, and vote that way. And if you do, then we'll take the next step.
All right, we'll take your recommendation then. Anybody want to make a motion on that being the grocery store being the use? All right,
Mr.
I'll
Chair,
make-
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that the butcher shop be defined as a grocery store.
all right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, do we have any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, it's a recommendation for the city council to add that to the table for the
No, this is you are making a finding, since it's not clearly established in the table, you're making a determination that the most clearly analogous use is a grocery store, and then based on that, you will treat it that way going forward, but for clarity's sake, we'll come back with an amendment in the future and put it in the table.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Any other? All right, roll call, Carol, please.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond,
Yes.
Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lede,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
All right, motion's approved. All right, we have agenda item 230502. This is an application for zoning change. We'll have a public hearing on this agenda item. If anybody here wishes to speak on it, please come up to Carol. She has a sheet. You can.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. We got to go back to that item. You got to take
Oh,
step
I'm
2 now.
sorry.
That's all right.
Shoot.
Now that you've determined that the butcher shop's most clearly analogous use is grocery store retail, this property is located in a B2 district, which requires planning commission approval for that proposed use. And so now you need to make a determination as to whether or not that use is appropriate in that district and to
I'm
grant.
sorry, I
Black
got
Hills
to
Road.
rush and got ahead of myself. All right, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the land use for agenda item 230501, a boutique butcher shop in B2.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Roll call, Carol, please.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond, Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lede, McMillan.
Yes.
All right, motion's approved. Now we'll move on to agenda item 230502, application for zoning change. If anybody here is here for the public hearing, Carol has a sign-in sheet. If you would, please come up and print your name and address. We'll call on you, come up to the podium there, and we'll be glad to hear from you. All right, this is a application for zoning change from an R1 to a B2. It's Lot 2 Woodside Business Park. The applicant is Lambeth Enterprises LLC. Casey, staff report, please, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this applicant is proposing to rezone the property located along Broken Branch Circle, identified as Lot 2 Woodside Business Park. The subject parcel was recently annexed into the corporate limits of Spanish Fort as R1 and totals approximately 0.7 acres. The proposed use for this application has been given as commercial parking lot. The existing conditions within the vicinity of the subject property are typically local to general business type uses. Due to the existing conditions in the surrounding area, the proposed use as additional parking for the adjacent property is expected to have little to no impact on the area. The subject property was not identified on the comprehensive plan's future land use map because this area was not located within the city limits at the time the comprehensive plan was created. Due to the property's recent annexation, the future land use map of the comprehensive plan cannot be referenced as the proposed zoning for this area was not identified at the time. However, based on the original plan of development for the overall center as a business park, as well as the previous zoning in Baldwin County's jurisdiction as commercial, along with recent zoning changes to the surrounding properties, staff feels confident in recommending the proposed zoning change for this parcel. Therefore, staff recommends the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council regarding Agenda Item 230502, application for zoning change from R1 to B2 for Lot 2 Woodside Business Park.
All right, thank you, Casey. All right, we'll open it up for discussion. All right, discussion is closed. We'll have our public hearing. Anybody wish to speak? Public hearing is closed. Any other discussion? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a positive recommendation to send that to the city council for 23502 for application to rezone.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All right, roll call. Carol, please.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond, Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lede,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
All right, motion's approved. All right, we're going to go back to our discussion item, which was a sushi restaurant on Marsala Avenue. We can pick up where we left off on this discussion. I believe we were talking about the waiver for the front setback, and I think that was the major issue, the big topic of conversation.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we were discussing. One of them is the easement area here. We need to get some more guidance about the purpose of this, how it arose, where it's at. There would need to be buffering that occurred between the business use and the residential use. They've informed us that they're going to construct drainage underground, as I understand it, and then that's the setback, right? We have two setbacks. One is the construction highway setback, which would require a variance or a waiver of action be taken, and then you have the and also then you have the landscape buffer that sits over the same space. So there's two setbacks here that apply. One of them is local legislation for the construction highway setback. The other is the city's zoning ordinance and landscaping that would need to be addressed. And you also, again, counting spaces, I think it was 75 seats that he was trying to get in the restaurant. If you did away with these spaces, it would require the restaurant seating to be reduced down to about 50, as I understand it from Matthew. That's one way to address the issue. But one of the things I want to make sure that we're all clear on is the parking requirements themselves in the table are minimum parking requirements, and I think that's where we left off, which means that for a proposed use like a restaurant, when someone comes in and submits that to us, then those are the minimum standards based on what's done basically around the country for those types of uses. An average use, average restaurant, minimum standards. But a particular business has to be aware of what their actual use might be or actual projected use might be. For example, not all retail stores are the same. The demands can be different. You can take a retail store, for example, like a Dollar General, where now they're placing them in neighborhoods, and there are a lot more convenience, a lot more of them. A 10,000 square foot store will generate X cars. You can take a name like Aldi or Trader Joe's, put in that same 10,000 square foot store, and you would not have enough parking to address those people because the demand. It's an unusual circumstance. So each property owner, engineer, developer, as they're looking at their site, not only needs to look at the minimum parking that we require, but what are they actually anticipating to use, because if you don't plan for that, then you can create an issue. And here, we're talking about our minimum parking standards and requirements, so it deserves definitely some talk and discussion with the engineer and the property owner. And as we always are, we're always trying to figure out a way to help folks, but we also can't create a situation where people are trying to park out here in the roadway because they can't get in the parking lot, or they're trying to park over at Papa John's because they can't get in the parking lot, or over here. We're seeing the results of that a little bit in a different location, and we've just got to be careful that we analyze this the right way as best we can, if that's fair.
Question, so he's proposing 75 seats in this restaurant, is that correct?
Yeah, that's his goal, is to have 75 seats.
And so with that, it would require 1.2 parking spaces. Am I doing the math?
Four seats.
For 4 seats, okay.
Every 4 seats.
Like a booth, yeah, one car per booth, you might say.
That's 23 parking spots. That's 23
Four at a
parking
table.
spots.
23 seats.
So,
23 parking spots for 75 seats.
yeah, so just general discussion, we did approve, I say approve, we
He's got 26, I believe.
kind of granted positive for land use for this site. I think he's basically kind of got it about as tight as he can. The only thing I'd be concerned with is, when y'all do start doing real engineering and it has to go through a landscape plan, do we have any places to put landscape? And his minimum landscape requirements got to fit on this with all that paving. So I just want to make sure we're not hamstringing him as far as landscaping also goes. Because as we can see, most of the property is being utilized by asphalt, and is necessary to get the parking he needs. I get it. I mean, just not speaking for you guys personally, I don't mind him crossing over this buffer. I got no problem with the parking crossing over the 100 buffer. We've already moved it to 50 in some circumstances, and it matches existing paving out there on 31 now, as we can see to the right and left. And I'm thinking the more businesses that come along this corridor, they're going to be running into the same issue as that gets developed more and more. And just for continuity's sake, I kind of want to see all that. If I drew a line down through there, I kind of want to see them. I don't want some setbacks, some up front, some setbacks. So it makes more sense for the way he's got that parking up there on 31 for me.
I also talked with them about the landscaping because it was a concern of mine as well. There is one pretty large tree on the site. You can kind of see it's shaded there on the left-hand side of the building. There's the small circle, and then there's the larger kind of, cloud around it that I assume represents the canopy of the tree. That's a pretty large tree there. I did ask them to look at the landscaping before they came to the meeting today, so that they'd be able to provide the feedback. I don't know if they had an opportunity to do that or not, but I share that concern.
May I speak a second?
Just looking at it, I'm thinking they're going to need a landscape variance based on we wouldn't want to clutter every piece of dirt left, with something. Just to kind of make them meet a minimum requirement on the landscaping. We sure can't take a parking island like we have in the past for a landscaping. This being an existing build an existing site, we need to be thinking along those lines too. I'm sure it's coming.
Were y'all planning on leaving that large tree out front?
Yes, and if I may speak to landscaping for a second, there's a table, since he's zoomed in, you really can't see it, it's off to the right side of this PDF, but we did look at the areas, and I think, Matthew, you had mentioned there was the minimum of 10%, you know, that was required. The actual, if you add up all the non-paving surface, it's right at 23.5%. You can see that top section of 3 numbers there, that lot pervious area. That's the non-paved, non-building area on the site. So I think we can comply with the landscape requirements. If you look at that second group of 3 lines, that's just the area within the landscape buffer of the 25 feet. And so the point we were making there is it's about half and half. We're asking to pave about half of that landscape buffer and leave about half of it landscaped.
And the site is about 1/3 of an acre, if I remember correctly. And there's,
Yeah, so we're showing that 16,655 square feet. So yeah, that's real close
Okay.
to 1/3.
and so there's a minimum 10 overstory trees per acre. And then an additional amount for the frontage, which could be reduced by saving the tree, right?
Yeah, so what we
And-
discussed the other day was 4 trees total, no matter what are required, but we already
Mhm.
have the one big one, and it should count for a lot of the other front landscaping that would be required, leaving the possibility that there may only be 3. I've spoken to the owner and told him he would have to involve a landscape architect because it's not what we do, but I believe it's achievable if that's kind of the question at hand.
Would that work, Matthew?
That's right, and there's understory requirements, 1 for every 10 parking spots. Those are a little bit smaller trees than the larger ones. So that's something for them to figure out, but it's been discussed, so they're aware of it.
Well, it looks like you have a few hurdles to overcome, but, well, I guess the waiver is one of the things they need to know, otherwise they, you know, whether or not they need to go back to the drawing board, as far as getting the parking out of the setback. Yeah, they're allowed to pave in the. I don't know, is that the original setback that's on that property? Would that run straight across at the, or is that a new 100-foot setback?
Did you hear that? Okay. We're sort of at a crossroads about where we want 31 to go. We gotta make a decision here. Because initially in the comprehensive plan, we talked about setbacks, and now we talked about moving up close to 31. And now that 31 got moved to the south, we are close in a number of cases that were grandfathered in.
Well, we did have that discussion recently when we changed it from 50 to 25.
Right.
So,
we reduced it
we
from 50 to
just,
25, but now
I think the ink is
they're
still
wanting
wet
us
on
to
that
move it
paperwork.
inside of 25. I mean, that's
That's what I'm
starting to
saying.
encroach. I worry about drainage, and I want as many tabletops as you can get, because that's revenue for us. But we're starting to encroach a little close here. Environmentally, Cody, you have an opinion on this?
I honestly believe we gotta start landscape buffer now before we continue, before it disappears. You've already moved from 50 foot to 25 foot, so, I mean, at some point you gotta start it and continue it from there on out. It's just gonna keep running away, so.
I will say, when we had the discussion down there at Cactus Cantina, we all kind of felt like 100 was too far. We did. I remember our discussion saying, wow, that's a long way. That's a lot of green, you know, a lot of green space. I've always felt 100 is too far away from the right of way, right? It's not the road, it's the right of way. And then you're 100 foot. Or is that center line? That's center line, 100 foot.
Yeah, the highway construction setback is from the center line.
So if you think about a 200 swath that nothing could be built, you know, from the center line of the road, that's a long way.
Now, with all your underground detention, it's, I guess, clearly gonna flow from south from 31 right onto your, I mean, cause considering losing pervious surface, I mean, considering the 1 inch first flush, I mean, is it all coming south on the property?
No, it's all going north. Yeah, so
It's all heading 231.
it's all heading, yeah, I mean, it's a flat lot now. There may be portions of it that are, you know, kind of spilling
Yeah.
south, but the majority of it's going north. And we would be proposing to take it all north with a similar outlet structure to what you see there on Fitzgerald. And one other thing I'd like to mention is, you know, Mr. Tan, of course, I know that y'all can't consider this. He has purchased this property. He does own it. And so there's two issues at hand. One is, can he even put the spaces there? The second is, if he puts them there, can he count them towards tabletops? So they're both very important issues to him. But the first issue of can they even be built there is kind of a do or die issue for him, because he mentioned, okay, I've got 4 employees at least, you know, that would be taking up parking spaces. 2 of them are handicap spaces. So if I'm left with 9 spaces, I don't have a restaurant. And so these spaces and whether or not they can or can't go in this landscape buffer is a very big deal for him. The tabletop of being able to count those is still a big deal, but that's the difference in 50 seats versus 75. It's still substantial for him, but not as substantial as can I even have the parking spaces.
So I want to ask the question, prior to him acquiring that property, did he know the restrictions on the number of parking and setbacks and all that? I know staff relayed it to him.
Yeah, I don't know. He would have to speak to that.
I mean, sometimes the square peg doesn't fit the round hole, and that's.
Comes down to do you all see value still in the 25-foot landscape buffer? If you don't, and you feel like there needs to be a change, then now would be the time to do it in that discussion. You've reduced it from 50 to 25. If you don't see the value of that at this point in time based on the alignment of the road, how things have happened, where it's at, either in whole or in sections. What I mean by that is there may be some other areas, Matthew brought this up, there may be some other areas that are undeveloped yet or still have a lot of buffering that you might say, yeah, I still want to keep it there, but this part of town's just different. It's older. We might need to go look at this because of how things were done. So I guess there's a couple of options. One, if you don't think you want to maintain the buffer anymore, then you amend it and do away with it. If you think it has value, does it have value up and down all of 31, or are there sections of 31 based on development that lend itself better to having that versus others? If you do think that it has value either across the board or in this area, then we would need to try and figure out some way to help accommodate this other than just a straight up waiver. Does that make sense?
Did we not have some discussion at one point about landscape buffers, et cetera, with regard to the size of the lot and the fact that it could be so we were gonna look at that, on a case-by-case, depending.
We did when we talked about the 50-foot buffer, because the mayor and others brought it to our attention that as you go east down 31, that there are some older parcels of property that the landscape buffer basically would have taken up half the lot. So when you came back to 25 feet, of course that helped everybody. There would still maybe be some lots because while they might have enough square footage to meet the lot size requirements, because of an irregular shape, they may be wide but narrow this way. And so they still might be affected a little too much by the 25 foot. And we said with those, we'd have to look at them kind of on a case-by-case basis. Maybe that's something for the Board of Adjustment to look at and make a determination. This might be that too. So if you're saying that you want to maintain the buffer in this area or up and down the whole highway, then we'd have to determine whether it was appropriate for this board to grant a waiver, whether we go to Board of Adjustment because of some hardship issue, let them take a look at it. We'd have to figure out what to do. But I think the first question is, do y'all think the 25-foot buffer has value? Do you think it has value through the whole city? Do you think it has value in sections of the city versus others? And that may not be something you can answer sitting here tonight. It's going to require a little field work from staff to let you know that, or maybe y'all drive around and take a look, and let's talk about it at a subsequent meeting. But I think that's the key issue. Do you want to maintain it or do you don't? Or do you not?
All right, if a waiver is approved, are you saying this has to go before the Board of Adjustments?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how it would work. The construction highway setback waiver under the state and local law comes from the Planning Commission. Normally, an amendment or a variance from the zoning ordinance goes to the Board of Adjustment, although the Planning Commission does have some authority to grant some waivers, at least as it relates to landscaping, for example. But setbacks and those kind of things normally go to the Board of Adjustment. So that
This would just be the landscape.
yeah, the landscape,
setback
you
that
can
we'd
give a
be dealing
waiver on
with.
that potentially.
This buffer is in the landscape ordinance.
Yes, yeah.
So that's basically all we'd be dealing with is a landscape ordinance, because I believe they've stated earlier that it's allowed in the 100-foot setback parking is. Correct?
Yes, it's allowed to be
Okay, all right,
constructed.
so we're basically just dealing with the landscape ordinance then, a waiver from that.
The parking can be constructed in the highway setback, but it can't be counted towards their parking requirement. Is basically how that. That's, what was that?
Well, I'd like to say that we had, I think we discussed it at length with the Cantina restaurant about, and we changed it to 25. At that particular time, I think if anybody would have brought up 0 landscape setback, I don't know how that would have flown, and that's
Well,
what we're
I think
talking
one
about
thing
doing
to-
right now.
One
And-
thing to consider, I think, on the Cactus Cantina, that lot was a good bit bigger. They had a lot more, and I don't want us to be the killer of this thing if that was going to happen. I mean, the house is sitting there vacant, doing nothing right now. I mean, it would be a huge asset if we could figure out a way to make this work for him. Somehow, some way. I don't know what that is exactly, but I think we ought to try to figure something out to make it work.
I, for one, would be inclined to grant a waiver. I don't think we're prepared at this time to go in and try to change our landscape ordinance that we have just amended here and most recently. So I would be more in favor of granting a waiver. Granted, that may give us trouble on the next business that comes along that we don't think needs the waiver. They have the room, but they want to utilize the whole property for the building. So, from a legal standpoint, that could throw us into a tizzy down the road, but that's what I would be more inclined to do.
Yeah, and just to add, I was gonna answer David's question. He kind of posed a question to all of us. I like having that 100-foot setback in place, and I like being able to control it like we do the way we have with Cactus Cantina and possibly this property too, because we're always gonna run into a different situation, because we're an older city, and we got existing businesses on either side, and I think that's, I mean, I just feel like there's always gonna be an issue trying to set that as a standard. But I like having it in place.
Yeah, I do too. So you heard my opinion. I know we're not taking any vote or anything. This is just for discussion, but that's just the way I would be leaning. I think you have another hurdle though to jump over, and that's the drainage easement on the back of the property. That we probably can't do anything about. If that is a valid drainage easement, you're gonna have to deal with that somehow or another.
I want us to be careful about setting a precedent here, because once we do it, we've opened that door. I'd like to see staff, maybe at the next meeting, come back with some pictures of the rest of that area through there, different lots where this is gonna affect us, so we can have a good feel about the picture we're painting. Because I'm not prepared to, of course, we're not gonna take action tonight, but I sort of wanna go up and down and look at all that section of 31, because it did change when the road got widened. I'm not prepared to give up our buffer. I think it's important we keep that. Waivers may be the answer, I don't know, but we're setting a precedent, and once we do it, we're gonna have to live with it forever.
And Mr. Chairman, if I would, if y'all, when you get kind of done with your meeting, I would suggest we go into executive session just for a moment to talk about a few issues, and then you can adjourn from the executive session. You don't have to come back in. But, so whenever y'all get done, let me take us into executive session for just a few moments, and then we'll adjourn from executive session.
And we all do need to ride up and down 31 and look at this real good. That's a good advice.
All right, any other discussion? All right, we need to
Excuse
take a
me.
vote to go on to executive session.
We do.
Mr. Tan wanted the opportunity to say something, if y'all would allow it. Thank you.
Good evening, all. I'm Steve Tan. I recently bought this location after 4 months being pending. That location, I asked Mr. Finch to make a parking solution, and according our estimate, we could develop a restaurant in that lot. I didn't know about this easement that was brought up to Mr. Matthew. I apologize about that I did not know earlier, but it would definitely help me out, because I put all my saving in this, and I have a huge mortgage on this, and with only 16 parking lot, with employees parking lot and handicap, it's not possible to accommodate all the cars that we need to run a restaurant, a small restaurant like this. Even though it's a small restaurant, but I need those parking lots to accommodate all the cars. So again, I apologize that these issues come up. I didn't know about that setback before. I was only counting how many parking lots I can put on the lot. And then the drainage issue will be addressed as well, and the landscaping as well, but I did not know about that setback. So I would like to request all of you to consider that and help me out to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you for investing in the city. We thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
As far as the drainage easements go, it looks like you've only got a few feet of the parking in that drainage easement, so surely you got some wiggle room there to try to get that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, we could try to make some adjustments, but it is super tight, and you know, that depth, I know those spaces look long, someone mentioned that is actually from the ordinance, the length required, you know, for those spaces at that angle, so we don't have a lot of room. And I guess, you know, I would say, I know every city's different, but typically, a drainage easement, especially if it's doesn't have a ditch, you know, if there's nothing there, then it's just the property owner's risk that if a pipe has to be installed, or if something has to be installed, that, you know, that it's his problem to fix, you know, after whatever work gets done. Y'all may see it differently, but I know it's handled that way in other jurisdictions. So it's something you guys, we'd have to speak with staff and let them kind of guide us in that.
And I looked at, I looked at the contours for this property and the surrounding properties, and the parcels to the south drain toward this property. So he will have to manage the water from off-site that's coming onto his property, one way or the other, drainage easement or no drainage easement, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and we may be able to improve the situation and do away with any need of a drainage easement. One other thing I want to mention, I'll hand this to them, I don't know if y'all can see it from here, but Mr. Tan has looked at the possibility in that landscape buffer of doing landscape pavers. They're kind of X-shaped that allows grass to grow through them. If that's something that would, could be a condition, if you guys, if that would help, you know. I know it's not 100% landscaping, but it is a lot of grass area that you can still park over. So just wanted to mention that as a possibility.
All right, all right. David, we're gonna take a vote to see if we're going to executive session.
Yeah,
I
that'd
think
be
we've
good.
got all our questions answered.
And Vince, if you could provide us whatever y'all saw that made y'all put that drainage
Yeah, I
easement there?
emailed it just a few minutes ago. It
Perfect,
was a
okay.
survey from Poly Surveying that
Okay.
showed that. I'll reach out to them to see if it was on a plat. I assume it was, and I'll get that to you.
That'd be great.
For sure. And I'm sorry, just for Mr. Tan's sake, I think what we're hearing is a maybe, you know? I don't think we're hearing a yes. I don't think we're hearing a no. I think we're hearing you guys want to work with him, and we have a maybe. As far as guidance for him, I know that he's got to make a decision, does he proceed with full engineering? And he wants to, he's ready to go, but that's also money wasted if this is a no. So how would you advise us on kind of the waiting game and what we need to do to help make a more educated decision?
David, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, as you know, the planning commission can't take a vote per se about something that they don't have in front of them so far as that's succeeded. But I think what you can take away is that everybody would like to try and figure out a way to help if we can, while at the same time being fair to the other property owners in the area who've had to comply with the same ordinances, same rules. And so I think everybody's willing to look at it and try and figure out a way if it's possible. But answering those questions would help so far as, you know, that part of the property. And then, you know, calculations as to tables and space. Those are the kind of things I think we ought to let the staff kind of do their survey of the area, let that take a look at that, report back, and then I think it might be worthwhile for me and you and staff and Mr. to get together and kind of talk about that to see what we can and might come up with as an alternative. The Planning Commission, City Council, the city always tries to help every way they can to help business owners and good people, and y'all obviously are, and he is. But we also have to make sure that we manage this thing and treat everybody fairly. And so that's what we're trying to figure out is how can we help him, one, without exposing the city to unnecessary liability and without undermining the ordinances that we're making people comply with. So we have to be able to tell the next person why we did what we did, so we try to treat everybody the same.
All right, David.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you've, I think the last item on your agenda is public participation. Have you already called that, or is anybody else, or was that it? Okay. Then you make your announcements, and then we will go into, I recommend we go into executive session at that point.
All right, the next regular meeting of the Planning Commission will be held Monday, June 12th. A work session will begin at 6 p.m. in the multipurpose room of the Spanish Fork Community Center, followed by the regular meeting at 6:30. The next informal work session of the Planning Commission will be held Tuesday, May 30th at 6 p.m. The submission deadline for June regular meeting agenda is Tuesday, May 9th at 12 noon. Anybody have any other comments or anything? All right, David.
Mr. Chairman, I make a recommendation the Planning Commission go into executive session in accordance with Alabama Code Section 36-25A7A1 to discuss the general reputation, character, professional competence, or mental health of individuals, or subject to the limitations set forth in that section, discuss the job performance of certain public employees. Also in accordance with Section 3, to discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation, controversies not yet being litigated but imminently likely to be litigated, or imminently likely to be litigated if the governmental body pursues a proposed course of action. I make the oral declaration that the discussion is appropriate for executive session. Is anticipated executive session will last approximately 15 minutes, at which time you can adjourn from the executive session and you will not have to come back in here.
All right. Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Roll call, Carol?
Can I ask who did the first, please? Who made the motion? Davis?
Yes.
Diamond? Vaughn? Lindsay? Nelson?
Yes.
Lede?
Yes.
McMillan?
15-minute executive session, then we'll adjourn, and that'll be the end of the meeting.